Hey, this is Mark from Caliber Home Loans. Hope you're having a good weekend so far. I'm not going to get heavily into the markets. I will go through what's happened the last week or two, but I just want to preface this with saying that the bond market and what mortgage lenders are showing for rates has been pretty disjointed. There's really no continuity anymore. So I'm going to go through this real quick and then give you a couple of ideas why. And I've added all kinds of resources to the email this week to help explain this in more detail from people who are a lot smarter than I am on some of these subjects. But so what you're looking at is Friday's chart, and again the graph is for the bond pricing. As the price goes up, the rate goes down, and vice versa. So I want to point something out. We always talk about the change. We don't really look at the numbers themselves. So what you're looking at is a bond that's issued at 2.5%. So when that bond is issued, it's at 100. It's called at par. So you're seeing that the price is above par. So what happens in the bond market is when the price goes up, the rate goes down, or the yield goes down. So technically, people who are trading in this bond are actually getting a yield that's less than 2.5%. You can well imagine that there aren't too many people that are very excited about getting that little of a yield on mortgages, especially now since we think that maybe a quarter of all mortgage holders will stop making their mortgage payment. So what's propping this up is the Fed is pouring billions of dollars into the bond markets to keep the rates low, but it's not flowing back into the lenders because of a lot of other issues and liquidity issues. Lenders have raised their rates to slow down production and to increase their margins so they can cover some of these liquidity issues. So for the last week, you'll see that again rates, again we're at 104, a little under 104. So that shows us that typically when the bonds are traded at that level, they're really yielding much less than 2.5%. And then so my program no longer allows me to go out farther than a couple of weeks. So I think that this is the last 2 weeks. So you see this is pretty much where the Fed started buying the bonds, and then it's kind of leveled off. Now the Fed has backed off a bit because it created other issues when they bought all these bonds. It created huge issues for the lenders, and everybody went into a cash crunch and had to get additional money lines and whatnot. And so the lenders are working through that. But it's hard to look at the bond markets now and then look at the rate sheets and go, okay, so where's the connection? I mean, there is somewhat of a connection, but it's not really there too much. So I just want to talk a little bit about the different areas that are affecting homeowners. So, we've heard a lot about the forbearance program that the Fed rolled out with the CARES Act. So this is not meant for everybody just to call their lender and say, hey, I don't feel like making my mortgage payment even though I'm still working. Now, the big difference between today and the meltdown in 2007, 2008 was back then you had to prove that you couldn't make the payment. Now there's no proof. You just basically call up the lender and say, I don't want to make my payment, or I can't make my payment. And then they go into the forbearance program from 3 to 6 months with Fannie Mae, and from Fannie and Freddie, and from 6 months to a year with the government agencies. But the thing that you have to remember is that the lender, the servicer, whether you make your mortgage payment or not, the servicer still makes that payment to the agency. So all this money is flowing out with any money flowing in. And so if people take advantage of this and decide that they don't want to make their mortgage payment even though they're able to, they're just going to compound the problem. And what's going to happen is that there are smaller servicers and lenders that are going to go out of business if that happens. Now the Fed and the government's trying to shore this up with added liquidity and lending and whatnot, but this is not a program that's meant for just everybody to willy-nilly decide that they don't want to make a payment because their neighbor who's out of work isn't making a payment. The other thing is, let's talk about just real quickly on bond programs. So MSHDA is considered a bond program. I don't understand quite why this is, but some lenders have backed away from the bond programs, at least for a 60-day window. Caliber is still doing the MSHDA program. I'm still pre-approving people under MSHDA, so that's still available. I'm not sure why that is, but if you've got clients or friends that are that are looking at purchasing under the MSHDA program, they need to call their lender and make sure they're still supporting this currently. The other thing I want to touch on briefly is that we don't really think about is when people are off of work. Now, I know nobody's going anywhere, so a lot of people are spending less money. But when people are out of work, they still have to eat and pay for certain things. Those typically go on a credit card. So anybody who's been pre-approved before this started, or is even in the middle of a transaction and has been put on hold because they've been laid off, temporarily laid off, they're going to ramp up their credit card debt typically, and we're going to know about that because lenders do a final check on the credit to see if the debt to income ratios went up before closing. So this is going to pull people out of who are already pre-approved or already approved. This is going to pull people out of that approval. So we have to make sure that we talk to people and say, I understand, there's no real good answer to this. I mean, people still have to eat, and there's still necessities that they have to buy. But I'm just looking at this down the road and saying, okay, we need to really make sure that we counsel our buyers and anybody that's thinking about getting a loan in this time of distress, and let's look at the reality and see that maybe we have to make some adjustments. So that's really all I have. This is a great time. Most of us are at home. It's a great time to learn new skills. If you don't have Zoom or a program like that lets you interface with your clients and friends and neighbors over the internet, it's a great program to learn. For realtors, I know that I think it's time to learn how to do virtual open houses. I would get your sellers involved in that. Maybe they can do the walkthrough for you, and you can find ways to post that. I included a video on that, but there's a ton of resources on the internet for doing this kind of stuff. So I hope everybody's safe and sound. Stay indoors. I know it's a pain in the neck. I'm not one to sit around and just look out the window. I like being out and about, as you can well imagine. But it is a time that we need to not only think about ourselves, but think about the person next to us. And even though we may not think we have it, you just never know, because you can have the virus and be asymptomatic. So let's just think of ourselves and the person next to us, and be careful and be safe and be sound. And if there's any questions you have, you can always reach out to me, 248-705-8431. Thanks, and have a great day.